My mic's working. Cool. Well, thank you for coming out tonight, and thanks to GCA and Klein Library and Beth and Karen and Alan out here for getting me on the dog and pony circuit here. As Karen said, I've been running the river for getting to be a long time now, and got just sucked into the stories of the place and telling the stories and researching them and writing about them, and then eventually trying to figure out what kind of boats they had and how those were built and what they're like. And this is a story about the Kolbs, sort of. It's a pretty discombobulated tale, really, but basically of the evolution of boats in Grand Canyon, how the Kolbs boat fits into that, and where we are now. So we'll start out with the brothers. There's Ellsworth and Emery, and they came out here just after the turn of the last century, 1900, founded a little photo studio on the rim, and made most of their money by taking pictures of the canyon and taking pictures of the mule riders as they went down the trail, and then they'd run down past the mules to the spring down at Indian Gardens, develop film, they'd print, run back up, and sell them to the guys when they got back to the top on the mule. So they were in real good shape. So here's one of their cards. They do just about anything for a crazy photo. And I'm not really sure why they're doing that, but it did make a good picture. He's down here with a camera, and somebody's obviously taking it. But the view hunters at work in the canyon. So 100 years ago, 101 now, 1911, they had this just absolutely crazy idea, an audacious plan to row the Green Colorado River. Now, not many people had done it by that time. Major Powell had kind of kicked it open in 1869, and then, half a dozen trips had floundered their way through, some with more success than others. But it wasn't something you just went out and did. Look it up on a website and send your Visa card in. It was a project. Now, Emery had rowed a canvas canoe that they had. It's on display right now at the Kolb studio. And it's a really wacky little thing. It doesn't look very substantial. But he had rowed that a little bit around Phantom Ranch and up and down the flat water just above and below there. And Ellsworth hadn't rowed anything at all. And so Emery is obviously the senior boatman on this expedition. This is what Ellsworth has to say in his fabulous book. It was suggested that we might secure the help of one of the voyagers who had been members of one of the previous expeditions. But we may as well be frank about it. We did not wish to be piloted through the Colorado by a guide. We wanted to make our own trip in our own way. If we failed, we would have no one to blame but ourselves. And if we succeeded, we would have all the satisfaction that comes from original personal exploration. We could not hope to add anything of importance to the scientific and topographic knowledge of the canyons already existing. And merely to come out alive at the other end did not make a strong appeal to our vanity. We were there as scenic photographers, in love with their work and determined to reproduce the marvels of the Colorado's canyons as far as we could do it. Most important of all, we had brought a motion picture camera. We had no assurance that so delicate an apparatus, always difficult to use and regulate, could even survive the journey, much less in such inexperienced hands as ours reproduce its wonders. But this, nevertheless, was our secret hope, hardly admitted to our most intimate friends, that we could bring out a record of the Colorado as it is, a live thing, armed as it were with teeth, ready to crush and devour. And it did. They had a rough ride. So they talked to both Galloway and Stone. Now, Galloway had come down there about 11 years earlier, 1897. And he was a trapper from up in northern Utah. He had kind of devised a boat that worked pretty well. Flat on the bottom, upturned at the end so it could pivot well. And he came up, as many people did, with the idea of rowing upstream in rapids so you could see where you were going, move off to the side of the rocks and the big waves. And that later became called the Galloway Technique. And he's credited as being the guy who really perfected it and popularized it. And then 11, 12 years later, was it Kolb, yeah. He hooked up with a really wealthy guy, ancient old man, he was like 54, and had a lot of money. And Julius Stone financed Galloway, going back to the east, and supervising a real boat shop, building 4 boats to Galloway's specifications, what he thought was the perfect boat. And so they built these professionally built boats to Galloway's design. They made it all the way through in 1909, and then Stone was so excited about this, he wrote to anyone and everyone who wanted to know about it and told them about the Galloway boat and the Galloway Technique. So the Kolbs talked to both of these guys. They wanted state-of-the-art boats. State-of-the-art boats going to be a Galloway. This is 15 years into the dominance of that sort of a boat. Before that, it had been Major Powell's boat, and we'll look at that in a minute. But it was a long keeled boat that really didn't pivot well at all. It wasn't a great whitewater boat. Galloway had revolutionized it, and now this is state-of-the-art. This is Galloway's boat from 1897. You can see, here's the bottom, it's flat, side to side, curved end to end. And that's the boat that he went down in 1897. It's longer than it looks there. And he decked it over with canvas front and back and made some little bulkheads before he went down the river. In 1909, this is one of the ones he had professionally built back in Michigan. And again, you see it's flat on the bottom, curved from end to end, and they have more decking on them now and a smaller cockpit. So they're becoming increasingly good for big water. But in most of the really big rapids, this is what they did, wind them around, carried them around. Well, Stone sent the blueprints of that boat to the Kolbs. The Kolbs sent it to the Racine Boat Company back in Wisconsin, and they said, we want 2 of these, but make them even better. Use a type of construction called lap straight, where the sideboards overlap one another and are riveted together, which makes it very strong. And put in a whole lot more rib work of oak, line them with galvanized steel and the hatches to try and keep the camera gear dry. So they came up with a contract, $450 for 2 of them, plus $2 for oarlocks. And they named them the Edith and the Defiance. And they were shipped out to Wyoming for their trip. But I'm going to jump around a little bit here. I'm going to go into the future here, back to the future, and talk a little bit about the Edith, which was Emery's boat. They survived that trip, and in 1921 re-outfitted the Edith for Cataract Canyon on the United States Geological Survey trip, and did a few changes to it, not much. And that was the last trip it ever did. 38 years later, Emery and his daughter Edith donated it to the National Park Service. There it is, there's Edith. And she lived to a ripe old age down in Sedona. And there's Emery, the oars. See this big patch in the side here. We'll talk about that later too. That's a big wreck. And then it sat outside in a covered patio for just about half a century. Here's the air conditioner blowing on it, and there's garbage all over, and rats nesting in them, and snow and wind. It was covered by a roof, but open to the weather. And it was neat that we could see all these boats up there, but it was kind of depressing to see them little by little disintegrating. So in 2003, we started a campaign. Several people who really cared about these things, along with the Park Service. And some of the folks up at the park were really feeling passionately about this too. So working together, we got a big campaign, and we took them out of this covered courtyard and got them to where they would be protected. And there's Gaylord Stavely, there's the superintendent at the time, Joe Alston, Richard Quattaroli, Cam Stavely, me with a really bad haircut, and some more other interested folks, Ellen Tibbetts, I think, there. And squeaked them out through the doors, put them in a archival mule trailer here, and towed them over to the warehouse. And then over the next couple of years, with the help of some volunteers and some professionals from the conservatory place down in Tucson, they cleaned them all up. They didn't like sand them down and put a new coat of paint on them. They cleaned them up to how they looked when they last came off the river. And they look great now. And here's Cam Stabley with a guy from San Francisco, Todd Block. This is another thing that got funded through this process of coming in and doing archival measurements of these boats so that you could recreate them should the originals somehow vanish or burn down or something. So we now have architectural lines of all of them. This is the Edith. This is one from 1923, the Glen. And here's one page of the 3 pages of blueprints of that boat. And these things are great. Even draws in that big patch I was pointing out there. Well, 2011, last year, another audacious plan. This time it was me, went to replicate and run the Edith for the Centennial and see what that thing was all about. Who were these Kolbs and what were they up to? So let's talk about the context of this. There's 4 designs of whitewater boats that have run Grand Canyon in the hard boat category. There's a lot of glitches, but 4 main ones. The Whitehall boat, which is this thing here. These are end-on views that I drew on my iPod on an airplane. This is, you can see it has sort of a guppy belly, and then it comes into a sharp, pointy keel there. And that keel goes end to end of that boat. So a very long, skinny boat. And those were run from Powell's Day on up to about 1890, the second railroad survey trip. And then a few glitches later on, like Loper, Russell, and Monnet tried to run them in 07. 1 out of the 3 made it. Eddie built some really oversized ones in 1927. They were wretched things, but they survived somehow. These get eclipsed by the Galloway boat, 1896. And here's a Galloway boat in cross section. And flat bottom, not quite such a rounded side, and a little bit of upkick coming towards us here on the end and on the far end. And those were the boat till 1937. When Norm Nevels replaced that with the next step, he made a boat similar to the Galloway, but about a foot wider. And it made a tremendous difference in stability. And then he made them shorter, which made them much more maneuverable. And he made them out of plywood, which was a cool new invention, and that made them a lot easier to run and to build. These get eclipsed in the 50s and early 60s by a boat coming down from Oregon, and this is the boat that we all see in pictures today and TV shows, the Dory, which is this Oregon boat. It's called a drift boat up there. Has really high prow, the sides flare out, and again, it has that flat bottom and upturned ends. So that's really the progression over the last 140 years of boats on the Colorado. There are a few glitches I'll mention here. Buzz Holmstrom in 1937 made the last Galloway boat ever built, but he made it like that, only a little wider and a little shorter. So it was somewhere in between these two. Brilliant boat, absolutely brilliant. This is its 75th anniversary this year. I'm running a replica of that downriver. P.T. Riley in the 1950s was running with Nevels and started putting more decks on the boat, so there wasn't so much place for water to swamp them out. And instead of the big broad end on it, he made it pointy on both ends. A better boat, but it still went under more waves than it went over. A real interesting guy, you may have heard Tom Martin's talk, a guy named Multi Fulmer made a boat called the Gem, which was more like a drift boat than it was like a Nevels boat. He had started on a trip with Nevels, and so he was way ahead of his time. And then there are some really unfortunate glitches in the history. There's James White's log raft in 1867, which is a great debate. I'm right, he actually did do it. Mine says I'm wrong, but he's wrong. And this is 2 years before Powell. And then in 1928, Glenn and Bessie Hyde built this huge wooden box called a Sweet Scow. And the boat survived the trip, but they didn't. And so we're not going to talk about this stuff here. Okay, let's look at these in a little more detail now. Here is a Whitehall boat with its skin taken off partially. And you can see down in the bottom this long board, it just goes end to end, 22-foot long board, and the whole boat is built off that in steam bent oak ribs. very complex hull, the most sophisticated